Thank you, Mike. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this very important conference and for the opportunity to share with you the findings from the global survey of circumcision harm. A couple of housekeeping things. On your chairs, you'll see a packet of information where it has information on how you can continue your own research on this subject. And there are not one, but 3 new documentaries in the making on this subject, 2 from America and 1 in Germany. And I would encourage you, if it's within your means, to give financial support to these important documentaries. Also, I will have a PDF document of all of these slides available to you if you want to see me later and sign this list and give me your email address. So, a good place to start would be looking at the scope of human genital mutilation. As you can see on this chart, from the bottom to the top is the least invasive to the most invasive, and where the orange arrow is in the middle, where we know male genital cutting as circumcision. And it's actually more severe than the more common forms of female genital cutting. In fact, last year, Sir James Munby stated that circumcision of boys is significant harm and more damaging than mild forms of female genital mutilation. It's known by different names around the world. Here you see photographs of Filipino tuli. In South Africa, if you go to this website down at the bottom, you'll see some pretty horrific examples of what happens each year during their circumcision season, where scores of men lose their penises, lose their lives. In Turkey, it's known as Sünnet or Katan. In other parts of the Muslim world, there are various other names for it. And of course, in the Jewish community, there is Brit Milah, which happens on the 8th day of life. But we in the West know it as circumcision. And the first step in a circumcision in Western hospitals is to strap a struggling infant boy to a plastic board called a circumstraint. And as you can see in this black and white photo, this baby is not crying because he has a wet diaper or because he's hungry. If you were to listen to an audio recording of this, it would be a high-pitched scream that if this were being done to an adult, you would recognize it as screams of torture. The scope of the problem is something also to take a look at here. These are very, very conservative estimates that in the world today, there are over 100 million females who were subjected to some form of genital cutting in their lives, but there are 650 million males. That's 1 girl for every 7 boys. And when you bring it down to a country level like the United States, where there are no central record keeping of the number of circumcisions, the number of complications, the number of deaths, we only have estimates. And currently the estimates are that the annual average rate of circumcision is 60%. And when you look at that, it's over 1 million babies a year, 1 every 26 seconds. And when you look at the complication rates that were estimated by Williams and Kapila of 2 to 10%, we're talking about 1.3 to 6.6 million men in America have some form of circumcision complication, whether they realize it or not. When you bring that out to the global level and you look at just the 4 main circumcising groups in the world, Muslims, Jews, Americans, and some African tribes, it's about 650 million males in the world. And when you apply the complication rate of 2 to 10%, it's between 13 million and 65 million males. But even if you're very, very conservative and just say it's a 1% complication rate, there are still 6.5 million men in the world with some form of complication. And that does not even include other circumcising groups like Filipinos, South Pacific Islanders, Australian Aboriginals, or South Koreans. Unfortunately, I predict that the scope of the problem is going to get worse. I do not know of any formal programs that are promoting female or intersex genital cutting, but there are formal programs to promote male genital cutting, primarily by the World Health Organization and UNAIDS. And it's called the Voluntary Male Medical Circumcision Programs in Africa, where over 6 million men have been conned into believing that this is going to protect them from AIDS, which of course we know it does not. But my concern is that these official programs are going to experience mission creep, where fewer men are interested in voluntarily being circumcised, so they're now pushing it down to the infant level. Or it'll turn into an intergenerational problem where the father was circumcised and he'll then impose it on his son. The attitude behind this is something that Travis Wisdom calls circumcisionism. And like sexism, racism, and heterosexism, circumcisionism is the hegemonic view in society that circumcision is a normative and acceptable practice, and it considers the uncircumcised or the intact male to be unclean, unhealthy, unattractive, unholy, and uncivilized. And individuals who express this view are, of course, circumcisionist. With so many men experiencing problems, so many men being circumcised, you wonder why you don't hear more voices about this. There's actually a lot of factors contributing to that, many of which are ignorance about foreskin functions and benefits, the lack of familiarity with how to identify circumcision damage, lack of appropriate opportunities to document their harm. There's also a phenomenon of psychological adaptation to early life amputation, where people make compensatory use of their remaining faculties. There's also, as many of you are aware, strong cultural, social, religious, and familial pressures on men. There's also gender-based expectations to be strong and not complain. There's a political correctness factor that we men should not complain about our genital harm to not detract from female genital cutting issues. And then there's also strong denial among victims and the circumcisers themselves. And what I'd like to show you here is a brief video which interviews circumcised Egyptian women contrasted with interviews with circumcised American men. And I think you'll see a lot of commonality in the attitudes there. And this is subtitled in English at the bottom.
الدين الإسلامي وفي القرى وفي الحتت الشعبية دايما يقولوا إن البنت لازم تتطهر زي الولد بالظبط. احكي لي بقى ده يعني ازاي؟ هل السنة اللي بتقول كده ولا ده تقليد عندكم؟
الوقت الطهارة على سنة الرسول، لازم نجيب الداية طهر العيال، وقت الداية بطلت وتبطل نجيب الوقت الدكتور بيقطع للعيلة.
يعني الدكتور هو اللي بيطهر البنت؟
الوقت العيلة لو ما اتطهرتش يكرم اختي تبقى
اسم ابنك
ما تظبطش.
اسمه عمرو. قولي لي بقى، لو كانت جت بنت كنت هتعملي لها، كنت هتختنيها برضو؟
اي
كلكم بتختنوهم؟ في ناس كتير قوي طلعت في الاعلام قالت ان في التلفزيون قالت ان الختان ده بيبوظ البنات وكده، انت رايك ايه؟
وهو ما بيبوظش حاجه عندنا، احنا متعودين على كده.
طب وما في وما بيحصلش مشاكل خالص للست من الموضوع ده؟
لا، ده متهيألي يعني ان لو هي ما عملتش الحاجه ديت فمش بتبقى طبيعيه.
انت لو جات لك بنت هتختني؟
معايا بنت ان شاء الله، اما تكبر هختنها زي ما انت بتقولي كده.
طب انت مش شايفه انها بتبقى حاجه قاسيه قوي على البنت ان يحصل لها كده وتبقى كبيره وفاهمه وتتوجع؟
ما هو احنا كلنا كده، وبعدين هي يعني احنا من نهار ما اتولدنا واحنا لقينا الحاجه دي قدامنا.
يعني لما بتحصل للبنت ما بتحسيش انها بتأثر عليها، انها لما بتكبر بتقعد تفتكر ان ده كانت حاجه يعني قاسيه عليها شويه ولا لا؟
لا،
عادي يعني.
عادي عندنا بالنسبه لنا. وبعدين احنا الوقت بقى الطب اتقدم فبنوديها للدكتور، وبعدين ما بتبقاش حاسه بحاجه يعني.
دكتور في ايه؟ في مستشفى يعني؟
دكتور في مستشفى، دكتور في عياده خاصه.
كان في طلع فتره كده قالوا ان الختان ده غلط وعلى الصحه.
ما منعناش اصلا، ما منعناش، لان البنت لازم تتختن، لازما ما اثرش عليها خالص. ده ياثر على
البنات ده مقتنعين بيه ليه؟
مقتنعين بيه عشان احنا طلعنا لقينا كده كلنا كده.
طيب انتي ختنتي بنات قبل كده؟
معايا 4 يوم ختنها.
انتي بنفسك ولا رحتي للدكتور؟
لا، ده كانت واحده دايه هي اللي بتختن.
لكن مفيش واحده صاحبه واحده ممكن تختن بنت؟
لا، ده واحده مخصوص ومعروفه في البلد.
ولسه موجوده؟
موجوده.
ولسه بتختن لغايه دلوقتي؟
لغايه دلوقتي.
كام بقى؟
اي حاجه بتاخدها ترضى بيها، 10 جنيه يعني كل واحد بما قدرت.
ما بتوجعش البنت بقى وهي بتختنها؟
لا، بتختنها وقعدتها في ميه سخنه وكله عادي.
ما بتصرخش وتعيط
بتصرخ، بنمسكها وبتقطع لها.
ولما تمسكيها وكده ده ما يأثرش على نفسيتها؟
بتأثر، بس بقى بعد كده بتروق.
خلاص ما بتفتكرش الموضوع ده ما بتكبر؟
لا،
Circumcision rate varies from state to state, but in parts of Middle America it's so common that to be uncut would be just plain weird. In Fargo, the circumcision rate is around 90%. We ordered a beer and wondered if we dare tell the guys what had brought us here.
Are you shitting me?
I grew up in the hockey locker room.
We had one guy on our team.
One guy on our team.
One guy out of the whole crew.
Yeah.
Wasn't done up. The best thing is circumcision.
Yeah.
Do it.
Everybody does it. It's just the way it is. So I suppose I'll have my kid do the same.
I will.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing. I don't know why. I don't know if it's right or not, but
that's just
seems like
because that's what I've been brought up with. And that's
the norm around here, I guess.
I think so.
So you can see there's a lot of common ground when it comes to denial among the victims. But one should not mistake denial of harm or silence with satisfaction. In fact, it's important to note here that the medical community has never investigated the long-term consequences to men from circumcision. And there is one Canadian researcher, Janet Bossio, who has begun to look at this issue, and she found in interviewing large groups of circumcised men and intact men, and when she asked about satisfaction levels, she found that the largest group of men in the intact group said that they were extremely satisfied to be intact. The largest group in the circumcised group was those who said they were extremely dissatisfied to be circumcised. And she found that when you're dissatisfied with your circumcision status, it results in lower body image and worse sexual functioning. Now, what she did not do is go into the specific factors contributing to these high levels of dissatisfaction among circumcised men. That's where my first study comes into play, which was of 546 participants. It ended up being published in 1999 in British Journal of Urology International. And then when the San Francisco Ballot Initiative came up to ban circumcision, I decided to conduct another survey, which is this online survey that I'm reporting on today. This was well over 1,000 participants that participated and were working on getting the results published. Looking at the actual statistics from this, demographically, the age range of respondents was from 18 to 80 plus. And the largest group of participants, 30%, were in the 20 to 29 age group. Most of them came from the U.S. Most were white. Most were circumcised at birth in a medical setting. Most came from Christian families. But I want you to look one row down to the current religious identification of the respondents. You see, 71% said they came from Christian families, but 32% said that they currently identify themselves as Christian. Also, when it comes to Jewish participation, we had men saying that 5% of them came from Jewish families, yet only 1% consider themselves still Jewish. This is an important factor because one of the big arguments used to support circumcision is this must be done for religious identification. But we're seeing here that children do not always follow their parents' religion. And more demographics, the majority of the participants were heterosexual, most were married or living with a partner, most were highly educated. A high percentage of men had a high degree of knowledge about foreskin functions and benefits and how to identify circumcision damage. And 76% of the men who responded reported knowing other men with circumcision damage. So these men are by no means isolated. The most disturbing statistic that came out of this for me was the age at first awareness of circumcision damage. And you can see here that 60% of the respondents reported knowing about their circumcision harm before reaching the age of 19. And more alarmingly, 25% learned about their circumcision damage before the age of 13. We need to pay attention to this. Looking at the specifics of what kinds of damage men were reporting, we see here, that, of course, that 100% of the men reported a partial or total loss of the foreskin and 72% loss of the frenulum, which is a highly erogenous amount of tissue under the head of the penis. We also had skin bridges, 63% prominent circumcision scars, and you'll see in the following photos some examples of this. These were photos of that men actually submitted to the survey. And you can see here in the upper left corner, this is irregular scarring. This area here is called a skin bridge. We'll have a video very shortly of a man describing how this impacts him. This is drastic skin tone variance on either side of the circumcision scar. This is something known as buried penis, when more shaft skin is taken away and the body of the penis retracts into the body itself. Here in the upper right-hand corner, we have pubic hair growing midway onto the shaft, skin tag over here, total ablation here of the frenulum on the underside of the head of the penis. And this lower right corner is an example of a tight, painful erection. There's absolutely no skin mobility for this man upon erection. Again, here next to this is prominent circumcision scarring. These two photos here, I had never seen this before until this survey, and I had to consult a physician friend of mine as to what this represents. This is permanent crease, an indentation across the head of the penis. This is because the head of the penis was caught in the circumcision clamp, and these men are lucky not to have had completely severed glands, which is much more common than you would think. And then this photo here with the hand in it is an example of meatal stenosis. This happens exclusively in males who were circumcised as infants. It's when the urinary opening closes from irritation, and many boys need a surgical reopening called a meatotomy. This gentleman, I'll let his words speak for themselves. He says, "My parents wanted me to be cut because they're very religious people and thought uncut atheists were bad people. The cutting was not very good, and this is what I have now. I suffer because of my cock, and I'm virgin." This is a partial degloving of the penile shaft skin as a result of his circumcision. Looking at sexual damage here, we can see that 75% of the men reported a dry keratinized glands from the lack of protection of the foreskin. 67% had an insensitive glands due to the same reason. 59% reported excess stimulation needed to achieve orgasm. And the next two statistics are very telling to me, because 41% said they experienced delayed ejaculation because of their circumcision, yet 18% reported premature ejaculation. This is a testament to how highly individualistic the harm of circumcision is, and we find the same thing with female circumcision. You saw in that earlier video, these women think everything is fine. They're not missing anything important, and the same phenomenon exists with circumcised men. This is a video of one man's testimony of how he suffered from skin bridges.
I am a 21-year-old man, and there is something terribly wrong with my penis that was caused when I was circumcised. After the surgery and everything had healed on my penis, the procedure left behind a permanent dermal adhesion between the glands of my penis and the shaft of my penis. Some people would call this a skin bridge, but the medical community refers to these things as adhesions. When adhesions are present after a circumcision, such as in the case of mine, they are there permanently. For my entire life, I have been experiencing physical discomfort because of the adhesion. As my body began growing, the adhesion did not follow suit, leaving me with painful and restricted erections. I always remembered discomfort in my penis at a younger age, but the increasingly tight skin began causing strong pains at the age of 14. I remember all too well the sensation of the skin of my penis trying to rip itself apart every night from the erections that I could not control. At age 16, the bridge became so tight that I could no longer experience full erection due to the pain. To this effect, I have been impotent now for 5 years. Every time I see circumcision in the news or in the media and there is debate, I feel like there's a voice missing. Everyone talks about what is lost or the theorized benefits, but nobody ever talks about confirmed damage. This is what I would like to change. To this end, I'm starting the cascade. I'm going public with this confession in a form of media that will never disappear and spreads very quickly. I feel that if someone who has been badly damaged both physically and emotionally by what is supposedly supposed to be a preventative health measure would speak up, then so would others who suffer from similar problems in all states of health and function in between. To this end, I invite you, the viewers who may be suffering from similar conditions, to begin sharing their stories and sufferings with the world. The only way we can prevent tragedies like mine from happening is if we speak out about it and stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves. It's your turn now, world. I invite you to spread this video. I invite all men who are badly damaged by circumcision to begin speaking out or informing others in any way they can. I hope that my message will serve as the first step in a chain reaction to be able to once and for all prevent a medically unnecessary procedure from ever causing harm again.
So moving on to emotional and psychological damage that these men reported, we can see that over 70% of the men experience anger or frustration about what was done to them. 55% said that they felt betrayed by their mother. 50% felt betrayed by their father. 58% felt betrayed by the medical profession. 77% down here at the bottom expressed dissatisfaction with their condition. This is in line with what Dr. Bossio found out in Canada. Self-esteem-wise, we see that 75% of the men felt less whole, 65% felt unnatural, 66% felt inferior to intact men, 74% reported feeling damaged. Looking at relationships, 62% reported that this circumcision impedes their sexual relationships. 32% said that it adversely affected their relationship with their mother. 29% said it adversely affects their relationship with their father. This next statistic I find very telling. 65% said that this causes them to distrust the medical profession. In the United States, at least, we know that men typically underutilize the healthcare system. If this is one of the issues, we know there are many issues that contribute to that, but if this is one of the issues that we're not looking at, we need to look at this. That if men don't trust the medical profession because of something that was done to them at birth, how willing are they to utilize the medical profession when they really do need it? Looking at compensatory behaviors, some men resorted to smoking, alcohol, drugs of various kinds, or food and overeating to compensate with their feelings about this. But I want you to pay attention to the 25% who said that the way they compensate is with compulsive sex. If you're not feeling what you should feel from sex, there is a natural inclination to want to compensate with quantity. We find the same phenomenon going on with circumcised women in Africa, where instead of quelling their sexuality, it actually excites their sexuality and causes them to seek out more sex because they're not getting the fulfillment that they should be getting from a natural type of sexual behavior with intact genitals. And this is highly suspect in terms of the HIV prevention campaigns that are promoting circumcision, because if men are responding to their circumcision by not wanting to wear condoms for lack of sensitivity and then having more sex as a result to get satisfaction, this is counterproductive to AIDS prevention strategies. Looking at disclosure to parents and their reactions, we can see that 25% of the men said that they did talk to their father about it, but 61% of those fathers were dismissive or trivializing of their sons' concerns. Slightly more men, 40%, were willing to talk with their mothers, but we also see 55% of the mothers were dismissive or trivializing of their sons' concerns. As for seeking professional help, it's not surprising that 64% of the men said that they did not seek out professional help. And when asked about the reasons for it, we see that 40% felt too embarrassed, 27% feared ridicule, and 38% felt hopeless about the situation. And of those men who did go see professionals, in the lower right corner, the various types of professionals you can see that they went to, only 25% were unsympathetic or dismissive of their clients' concerns. But of the 29% who were judged to be sympathetic, they didn't have any resources to refer these men out to, because there's nothing that exists yet for men to deal with their circumcision issues. Beliefs about penalties that should be done to circumcisers, you can see it's all over the court here. Some believe it should be fined by law, have their medical licenses suspended or revoked. They believe that the circumciser should be imprisoned. 17% checked off the other box and then wrote in their own responses, which I found some of these really interesting. Some said that these circumcisers should be registered as sex offenders, subjecting these circumcisers to unconsenting genital surgery themselves, cutting off their hands, death penalty. It's all over the board, but the more reasonable approaches were suggested that the punishment should be decided by legal professionals in line with human rights law. Talking about circumcision, one also has to mention foreskin restoration. And when I asked the men about whether they knew about this, we see that a high percentage of men, 96%, said that they did know about foreskin restoration, and yet only 85% were actually considering doing restoring their genital integrity through manual restoration methods, and that figure drops even lower to 73% who are actually engaged in the process of restoration. Yet, of those men who were doing restoration, we can see here that 88% said that they will probably have to spend the rest of their lives trying to approximate the look, function, and feel of a real foreskin. So clearly we have a problem, and I have some proposed solutions here. First is to name the problem. I offer post-traumatic circumcision disorder, which is actually a syndrome of issues affecting men. We also need more research, I believe, more higher level research at universities, medical schools. We need support groups for these men. This is a flyer of a support group that I organized in Vancouver, Canada, before I moved back to the States. We also need to include this new diagnosis in the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, which is administered by the WHO. The U.S. has its own diagnostic manual, the ICD-10. We need to get that diagnosis in there. We also, as individuals and organizations, need to hold our governments accountable for failure to protect the bodily integrity of boys. We need to lobby the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Medical Association, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch to protect boys. There is growing support for this notion. You can see here that the World Congress of Sexology and the Committee on the Rights of the Child have spoken out for bodily integrity, genital autonomy, and religious freedom of the boys themselves. And in 2012, there was a landmark court decision in Cologne, Germany, in which a 4-year-old Muslim boy was subjected to a non-medically indicated circumcision. It was for tradition. And it was taken to court, and the judge decided that this was against the constitutional law of Germany, that it violated the child's right to bodily integrity. And that caused shockwaves throughout the world, especially coming from Germany. But in December of that same year, the Bundestag, the politicians got involved in the issue. And after being lobbied by Germany's very, very tiny Jewish community on this issue, the Bundestag, without much debate, decided that they would pass a law to make circumcision legal in the first 6 months of life for any reason whatsoever. And you can see this one German cartoonist's reaction to this. This is the Bundestag chambers, and you have a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jewish cleric there with bloody knives standing behind a banner that reads, "For the right to circumcise little boys," and all the political parties down on their knees bowing to this concept of so-called religious freedom. But there is growing support even in religious communities. In Israel alone, there are at least 4 groups that are urging abandonment of infant circumcision and adoption of a new ceremony called Brit Shalom, which is a non-cutting ceremony for both boys and girls. And even within Islam, there's a website you can go to where Muslims are beginning to question this practice as well. There is also support from the International NGO Council on Violence Against Children, a special rapporteur to the UN General Assembly, and the Council of Europe in 2013 endorsed a statement to encourage its member states to begin a dialogue on this subject matter about the rights of boys to bodily integrity. So one has to ask, is this really a fringe group that we're talking about? I would say no. I would call this a vanguard of men who are beginning to speak out. They're tired of being misled by doctors and religious leaders. They're tired of having their harm ignored. And they have a right and a responsibility to speak out about a practice that has harmed them and continues to harm others. And so essentially men will no longer be silent. And along those lines, if you're a circumcised man, you have two choices on this matter. You can either fight against what was done to you in order to defend children, or you can fight against children to defend what was done to you. And along those lines, I'm going to end this presentation with two videos. This is Rob Rash, who is talking about himself being a victim of Brit Milah.
Hi, this is Rob Rash. I'm a victim of Brit Milah, and the government should have protected me from it. I was actually born a preemie, and so they didn't force circumcision on me when I was 8 days old because apparently I was, too unhealthy for it. But despite the health problems I had as a preemie, when I was a couple of months old, I believe it was around 6 months, they saw fit to force circumcision onto my body. Basically, one of my relatives held me down. A fanatical Jewish religious cleric known as a moil forcibly removed the most sensitive parts of my penis without my consent. And when this was done to me, it violated my human rights to bodily integrity, security of the person, human dignity, bodily autonomy, sexual autonomy, and freedom of religion. My religious freedom was violated. I actually chose as a teenager not to be Jewish, and I don't consider myself to be Jewish, but I'm still forced to have a religion that I don't believe in carved into my body. It should have been my choice at the age of 18 to decide whether or not I wanted to have the most sensitive parts of my penis amputated from my body. I would have definitely refused to be circumcised. I wish that I wasn't taxed. So basically, the government should be protecting people. They should be protecting boys and intersex children from forced genital mutilation, just as they already protect girls. The Constitution guarantees every citizen of the United States of America equal protection under the law. So it's time that the government started protecting all of us. I am a victim of Brit Milah, and the government should have protected me from it.
Thank you for a powerful statement, Rob Rash.
You're welcome.
And the government will protect you and men like you someday. We are going to make it happen. This is the United States of America. We are free people. We don't do such a horrible thing to free people.
It's time to start acting like a free country and end forced genital mutilation. Let people decide for themselves after they're 18 what they want to do with their genitals and what they don't want to do with their genitals.
And thank you for being here with the bloodstained men and their friends.
Thank you for having us here.
At the 21st Annual Genital Integrity Awareness Week. As you know, we're here at the White House. And we are demanding justice for American men.
We're demanding justice for American men, and we're demanding the right to genital integrity for all.
Thank you again, Rob.
Thank you.
And finally, I'll let this young man speak for himself. His name is Zechariah. He was circumcised at age 10 in his home country of Egypt. And this is an hour-long video. Obviously, we don't have time to play it all. But in this hour, he talks about all of these different factors of how he's been adversely affected. He suffers from post-traumatic stress, recurring genital pain, visceral flashbacks about the experience. He has an intense desire for revenge. He has a sexual compulsivity, loss of self-esteem. He's had suicidal and homicidal ideations. He feels betrayed by his parents, especially by his mother, which leads him to hold some misogynistic attitudes about women. He has antipathy toward doctors. He also expresses anti-Semitism for his belief that this all came from the Jews, which, as a point of correction, it did not begin with Jews. It began with the Egyptians before the Jews adopted the practice. But I'll play the first 9 minutes of this video, and his story is very telling of the harm that's inflicted.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا زكريا، شاب مصري، عندي 23 سنة. بعد تسجيلي في ناس كتير هتعلق على كلامي، وفي منهم ناس هتصفني بأن أنا إنسان مجنون، وفي ناس هتصفني بأني مجرد شخص حساس، في منهم ناس هتصفني بأني مريض عقليا أو مريض عصبيا أو مريض نفسيا أو عندي اضطراب سلوكي أو اضطراب عقلي. في ناس هتصفني بأني إنسان تافه، وفي ناس هتسخر من كلامي، وهتعمل منه أضحوكة. وفي ناس هتصفني بإني منحرف وشاذ، وربما يصل الأمر عند البعض بأنهم يتهموني بأن أنا كافر أو ملحد. في مجموعة من الناس هتصفني بأوصاف واتهامات لا حصر لها، وفي ناس أعرفهم لما يشوفوا التسجيل هيبعدوا عني، وفي ناس تطلب مني إني أدافع عن نفسي، لكن أنا مش هدافع عن نفسي، ربنا اللي هيدافع عني. وفي ناس هتتعاطف معايا وهتحس بألمي، وفي ناس هتؤمن بقضيتي، وفي ناس هتدعمني. أنا ما يهمنيش أي إنسان على وجه الأرض، ما بقاش عندي أي شيء أخسره في حياتي. رسالتي بوجهها للتاريخ، لأن الجنس البشري مش هينصفني، لكن التاريخ مش هينسى. الكلام اللي هقوله في تسجيلي ربما لأول مرة في حياتي بقوله، وربما لآخر مرة في حياتي هقوله. تسجيلي هتكلم فيه عن جزء صغير مما أعانيه كل يوم من ألم، بل وكل لحظة في حياتي. ودي مش المحاولة الأولى للتسجيل، لأني في كل مرة بسجل ما بقدرش أمسك دموعي. أنا كنت طفل طبيعي سليم، ما عنديش أي أمراض أو مشاكل. مش هقول كنت ملاك، لكن كنت إنسان طبيعي هادي، لا أحمل أي شعور بالغضب أو الكراهية تجاه أحد. كنت طفل ذكي، كانوا أسرتي بيحسدوني على ذكائي. كنت متفوق في الدراسة. والدي توفى وأنا عندي 6 سنين، كنت بحبه جدا. كنت بحب أمي وأخواتي. كان عندي أمال وأماني وطموحات في الحياة. كنت إنسان طبيعي جدا، وكانت علاقتي بربنا كويسة. كنت بحب أصلي، وكنت حافظ 10 أجزاء من القرآن، وكنت بحب أروح المسجد. كنت بحب ربنا. ولما وصل عمري 10 سنين، في يوم أمي طلبت مني إني أخرج معاها من البيت. ولما سألتها رايحين فين، قالت إننا رايحين مشوار وهنرجع البيت على طول. وافقت أنزل مع أمي لأني بثق فيها، ولأني بحس بالأمان معاها، لأني عارف إنها مش هتأذيني ومش هتعرضني للخطر لأي سبب. رحنا مستشفى ودخلنا، وقابلنا أخويا الكبير في المستشفى وسلمت عليه، وبعدين قعدنا على كراسي الانتظار لفترة قصيرة. سألت أمي إحنا جايين هنا ليه؟ ما ردتش عليا، وقالت لي إحنا هنروح البيت على طول مش هنتأخر. وعرفت من أمي إنها دفعت 75 جنيه في المستشفى، لكن ما كنتش عارف هي دفعتهم ليه. فسكت لأني ما كنتش حاسس بالخطر. بعد شوية أمي وأخويا قاموا وراحوا عند موظف كان قاعد على مكتب واتكلموا معاه، وأنا ما فهمتش هما بيتكلموا على إيه، لكني فوجئت بأن الموظف ناداني وطلب مني إن أخلع بنطلوني. اتصدمت ورفضت وسكت. وبعدين بصيت لوالدتي والأخويا، كنت عاوز أسألهم هو ليه الراجل ده بيطلب مني أخلع هدومي، وليه انتوا مش بتحموني منه عشان ما يأذينيش. لكن أمي وأخويا سكتوا وما كانش ليهم أي رد فعل. ولقيت الموظف فجأة مد إيده وخلع بنطلوني وملابسي الداخلية بنفسه عشان يشوف عضو التناسلي. اتصدمت أكتر وحسيت بالخوف وعدم الأمان. بعدها رجعنا تاني، قعدنا على كراسي الانتظار. كنت بدأت أبكي وأقول لأمي إني عاوز أمشي من المكان ده، لكن أمي وأخويا سكتوا وكأني ما بتكلمش. وكأني ما ببكيش. بعد شوية لقيت دكتور كان خارج من أوضة العمليات وقال لوالدتي إنه جاهز. ما كنتش فاهم هو جاهز لإيه، ما كنتش أعرف. لقيت أمي بتشد إيدي وبتقول لي روح مع الدكتور، وأنا رفضت وكنت ببكي بشدة لحد ما لقيت الدكتور شدني من إيدي ودخلني أوضة العمليات وقفل الأوضة. ساعتها بدأت بالبكاء الشديد وبدأت دموعي تنزل وأنا مصدوم مش عارف أعمل إيه. لقيت 4 أشخاص جوه الأوضة، منهم دكتور شاب وممرضة، هما اللي مسكوني ونقلوني على السرير ونيموني عليه وأنا ببكي. كان في دكتور كبير في السن على شمالي ودكتور وشاب ممرضة قدام رجلي ودكتور شاب على يميني. كنت ببكي وصرخ وانادي على أمي، لكن لقيت الدكتور الكبير في السن بيتجاهل صرخاتي وبيتجاهل بكائي ودموعي بكل برود وبيديني حقنة مخدر في ظهر إيدي. كنت لسه ببكي، وبعد ما أخدت الحقنة حسيت بدوخة وبدأت أفقد وعي شوية، وشفت الدكتور الشاب والممرضة. شفت الدكتور الشاب والممرضة بيخلعوا بنطلوني وبيخلعوا ملابسي الداخلية وبيفتحوا رجلي. حسيت بيهم وهم بيمسكوا عضوي التناسلي. كنت بدأت أبطل بكاء من أثر المخدر في الحقنة، وما كنتش قادر أحرك أطرافي كلها، وما كنتش قادر أحرك حتى عيني، لكن كنت حاسس بكل شيء. حسيت بالألم الشديد وهم بيبدأوا العملية. حسيت بيهم وهم بيقطعوا عضوي التناسلي، وبعد دقائق من العملية فقدت وعي تماما. اللحظة اللي فقدت فيها الوعي كانت أسوأ لحظة في حياتي. حسيت بإني فقدت كل شيء في حياتي. حسيت بإني فقدت الأمان وفقدت الثقة في أمي اللي كنت دايما عارف إنها تحميني من كل خطر، من كل أذى، وإنها ممكن تعرض حياتها للخطر عشان تحميني. حسيت بالغضب الشديد والرغبة الشديدة في الانتقام. حسيت بالعجز عن حماية نفسي. حسيت بالألم الرهيب. حسيت بإني فقدت عذريتي للأبد. فقدت قيم كتير في حياتي. فقدت قيمة الأمان، فقدت قيمة الوفاء والصدق والثقة والحب. قبل ما أفقد وعي تماما تمنيت من ربنا إن تكون دي آخر لحظة في حياتي، ودعيت ربنا ما أقومش أبدا من العملية إلا وأنا في قبري.
Thank you.